Irashaimase! Hello and welcome to Fataris' Kitchen. I'm your host, Chef Fataris. It's time once again for Shoot 'em Up Saturday, and on the menu this week we have Razion EX, a modern Neo Geo shoot 'em up now on the Switch. What kind of taste will it have? Let's get cooking and find out. From developer NG Dev, Razion originally released for the Neo Geo in 2014. It's a super impressive shoot 'em up to play on the Neo Geo, especially when you consider that that system's only a 16-bit, but it's still really fun to go and play. Now, fast forward to 2021, and we have the EX version of the game, which basically reworks some of the gameplay mechanics as well as updates the graphics from 16-bit to 32-bit, but it's still super impressive. So this is a horizontal scrolling bullet hell that I highly recommend. It's definitely well worth your time and money. For the digital. There is a physical release, but it's going to cost you upwards of 10 times the price of the digital release, so depending on how much of a collector you are, it may or may not be worth it to you. So that said, let's dive into this title and see what it has. Starting the game, we're taken to this screen here, which allows us to go and customize our controls, the sound, and there's also some screen settings that we can play around with. Starting the game, we kind of boot up like a secondary, almost kind of like emulation. This is similar to other titles that NG Dev has released on modern platforms like Fast Striker and Gunlord X. But that said, the game itself is super impressive. At this point, I do have the scanline filter turned on, and I'll get talking about that in just a little bit. Still, you can kind of see just how impressive this game would have looked on a 16-bit platform. It looks a little cleaner here, but as is, it definitely doesn't take away anything from the original. So starting the game, we have three difficulties modes we can play through: Novice, Normal, and Maniac. And they do get harder in what I feel to pretty fair increments. They do provide good challenges at all levels. Of course, today we'll just be playing it as Novice so I can show you the game. After that, we have this tutorial section which goes over the basic mechanics, including the scoring, but I feel like it's a little nebulous and cryptic. So I'll try and explain the mechanics as best I can to the fullest of my knowledge. So starting the game, we actually have one more menu level here, and this allows us to select level training, so you can go and train on any of the stage that you've unlocked. It does have 6 stages total, or you can go and train on any of the bosses that you've fought. Starting the game itself, let's talk a little bit about what we have here. So as I mentioned, this is a horizontal scrolling bullet hell. And on the higher difficulty settings, the bullet hell element is definitely more apparent, but in the later stages, even on Novice, it definitely shows its true colors. So we have two main ways of attacking enemies. We have our main shot, which also happens to be coupled with missile that we see, and depending on which difficulty setting you have, you'll have a different color ship, and that also means different colored missiles. In addition to that, we also have this little beam. There's nothing little about it, but which is our primary method of dealing damage and scoring some major points throughout the course of the gameplay. Using the beam will decrease your ship's power, displayed there in the bottom middle of the screen, and it will recharge over time, and it will recharge faster if you collect these gold cubes that are on the screen. The gold cubes themselves serve several purposes. So they basically act as our main way of achieving points, but they also add to a boss multiplier, and then they act as energy for our beam. So the main gameplay mechanics are learning how to use your beam effectively to both build score multiplier throughout the course of the stage, and then also just the right timing, so you don't end up being weak when it would be best to be strong. So what I mean by that is, as I was saying, when we fire the beam, it uses the ship's energy, and for a short period of time, you'll notice that the main shot looks significantly weaker. It doesn't have the spread, and so you lose a lot of your damage. So one thing the beam also does is when it passes through the gold cubes, you'll notice they change color to a green or blue. And that basically just indicates that they're frozen, so they'll remain on the screen longer and they won't decay as rapidly. They ultimately will fade from the screen, but that's only after a long period of time has passed. So the game itself does have some interesting scoring mechanics using the cubes. So of course, like shooting it with the beam, freezing them, will allow us to get like more points, more multiplier from the cubes. In addition to that, the cubes themselves can grow and multiply. So if there are 10 cubes on the screen at any given point, then those cubes will double in value, and it's like it has a rather nice like graphic effect there where the cube basically splits, and there's also a different audio tone when you pick up the cubes in that state, so that's one way to know that you're doing it right. So we find ourselves at the first boss here. So the boss, all those cubes we've been picking, so we have this like 23 multiplier there, and that is our boss score multiplier. So if I defeat this boss as things stand right now, I will get a ton of points because that's a really big multiplier. In addition, there's another bonus that we can get for defeating a boss by not using the beam. So the beam does cancel enemy shots, so it's really effective in helping keep you alive, but there's you lose that no beam penalty against a boss, or rather no, not penalty. You lose that no beam bonus the first time you use it against a boss. And then interestingly enough, if you continue to use the beam with abandon on a boss, then you'll ultimately get to the point where it will be causing penalties and you'll be losing multiplier for your beam shots against a boss. So it's kind of up to you. It's like, is it worth it to kind of progress your run on the game, or is it worth it to just not use the beam in the chances of scoring a higher amount of points? A lot of it is just due to your skill and practice on the title itself, and that's one area where like a training mode really does come into play. So I've been playing up to this point with the scanline filter turned on. So let's jump to talking about the graphics. So in the screen menu, we have the ability to adjust both the scale of the screen itself, as well as some other things like the background wallpaper, which you can barely see in the full-size screen. And you can also adjust the brightness. But the big thing that I think is important here is the scanline filter. So that can be turned on or off. We've been playing with it on up to this point. Turning it off and going back to the gameplay, you'll notice that things look a little smoother, but due to the nature of the graphics in the original, there is kind of a little bit of a washed out or fuzzy look. So what they were basically doing with the graphics for Razion, and really a lot of the titles that NGDev did, is that they would create a really nice detailed CG art for the game, and then they would render it to 16-bit and put that rendered art into the game itself. A really neat technique which allowed them to capture a lot of detail on a system that you would normally not see that kind of detail. I love that kind of innovation, and well, coupled with their solid shoot 'em up design, it really makes their titles stand out, especially in the realm of modern shoot 'em ups released for older hardware. But as far as scanlines are concerned, I'm fine with scanlines on actual CRT monitors. Generally, I choose to play with them turned off. So here we find ourselves against our second boss. You can go and see a little bit more of a kind of a bullet hell element with this one. We've got these really annoying pink lasers, which when they hit your Y plane, they'll go up or down to meet you, and they can go and make life a little bit problematic. So this is an area where it's really nice and helpful to use your beams to both deal more damage and to cancel out those enemy shots. But let's see if I can get it to the point where we start to hemorrhage. Yep, there. Once you've used your beam a few times, we start to hemorrhage multiplier every single time we fire it. So, it makes things easier. You just don't get as good of a reward for using it against the boss. Or you can even get to the point where your multiplier is almost nothing. So there's that. And that's basically Razion EX served up for your enjoyment. So as far as the minus flavors are concerned, the biggest thing that's kind of frustrated me about this title so far is actually something that's relatively minor. So the tutorial isn't really great. It's kind of cryptic in the way that it talks about the scoring. It's like saying you can grow the gold cubes, but it doesn't really explain what that even means. And even with some reading, I'm still not 100% sure I understand it, but I'm assuming it's referring to having enough gold cubes on screen that they multiply, so you can get that juicy multiplier and those points. And then the unlockable continues are another area where that I've had a little bit of frustration. So I would have really, and I enjoy the fact that you have unlockable continues, and it's not just as simple as play for X amount of hours to unlock additional continues. You actually have to achieve certain goals, like playing on training, no beam, finishing the game. But this is all stuff that I believe that's how I unlocked the continues. I'm not actually 100% certain. And that's because there's no place where there's an achievements where it's you unlock this continue and here's how you did it. I would appreciate that, because then I would have a clear idea of what kind of mindset I was looking for to unlock additional continues. As is, it's kind of trial and error. Is it finishing the game on higher details? What exactly is going on there? I wish it was just a little bit clear. But then, moving on to the plus flavors, and this is where this game really shines, the art is just beautiful. So there is a little bit of a faded or fuzzy look to it just by the very nature of the graphic style itself, but I think what they did here with these graphics, and even considering what it originally released on, is incredibly impressive. And I just love the design throughout the course of it. The game has six stages, and you've got unique enemies kind of peppered throughout. You don't really start to see a whole lot of repeat until you get towards the last couple stages, or rather the last stage really, and that's kind of something you would expect to see, because you're just seeing the enemies kind of repeat from the earlier portions of the game itself. You've got a really awesome horizontal scrolling bullet hell represented here in the gameplay, and then just the scoring mechanics, where it's all about trying to use the beam to freeze these cubes to get more points, to go and grow the cubes, give them the multipliers, that awesome sound and all that. It's it's just satisfying to kind of figure out things as best you can. Of course, the more points you score, also you earn additional 1-ups. Just really great design. And you also have to appreciate that it just kind of has that modern retro feel to it, and that's something that I feel the NG dev have done wonderful with all the titles that they've released. And I'm really happy to go and see that we're continuing to get more of their titles released on the most current of platforms, and in far wider availability than their older titles. So that'll just about wrap it up for this week's episode of Shoot 'em Up Saturday. This is definitely one that I highly encourage you to pick up, as I think it's a really great addition to any Shoot 'em Up lovers collection on the Switch. And just some fun, classic, retro gameplay with kind of your modern twists. So, that'll just wrap it up for this week. As always, I want to say thank you so much for joining me this week. I hope you have a wonderful week, and we'll see you again next time.